The attorney looked at my daughter and her husband across the courtroom. "Mr. Calloway," she said, turning to me, "is this your signature on the power of attorney document they submitted?" I leaned forward. "It is not." My daughter's lawyer shot to his feet. Judge Harmon waved him back down before he could open his mouth. "I'd like to hear from your clients directly, Counselor." She looked at my daughter. "Mrs. Vickers, are you telling this court that your father willingly signed over financial authority to you and your husband 6 weeks after his cancer diagnosis?" My daughter Diane, she goes by Di, stood up slowly, smoothing her blazer. "He wasn't in a position to make clear decisions, Your Honor. The oncologist will confirm. The oncologist you hired privately and paid for yourself," Judge Harmon said. Her voice had an edge to it. "The same one who has since had his medical license reviewed by the state board." Di's husband Troy grabbed her arm. Their attorney whispered something urgent. Nobody was listening to him. I sat quietly. I'd been waiting 7 months for this moment. I wasn't going to rush it. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this started in a courtroom. My name is Bernard Calloway. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Columbus, Ohio, and another 6 as a private consultant before I retired at 64 with a pension, a 401k I'd built carefully, and a house I owned outright in Bexley. A nice part of town, 3 bedrooms, a yard with a garden I'd been tending for 20 years. My wife Carol Ann passed from a stroke 9 years ago. It was sudden. She was gardening. This very garden I still tend, and she was gone before the paramedics arrived. I don't talk about that much. Some things you carry and don't put down. I have 2 children. My son Lawrence lives in Portland with his wife and their 2 boys. We talk every Sunday. He visits twice a year. He never asks me for anything, which is part of why I've never resented giving. Then there's Di. Diane was always the one who needed more attention, more money, more reassurance. Even as a child, she had a talent for making you feel like you'd failed her. Carol Ann used to say Di had a gift for unhappiness. Not meanly, just honestly. She'd find the one thing wrong in a room full of things right. When she married Troy Vickers 8 years ago, I thought maybe she'd settled. Troy seemed steady. He had a good job in insurance sales, drove a sensible car, shook my hand firmly at the wedding. I thought, okay, this might work. What I didn't see, what I let myself not see, was how quickly the 2 of them calibrated their lifestyle to my generosity rather than to their own income. It started small, the way these things always do. Their car needed a repair, $1,800. I paid it without thinking. Then Di was pregnant with my granddaughter, Sophie, and they needed a bigger apartment. Their current lease was ending. Could I help with the deposit? Of course. $3,200. Then Sophie arrived, and Di stopped working. Temporarily. Then temporarily became permanently. Troy's commission-based income was inconsistent. They found a house in Westerville they loved, and could I maybe co-sign the mortgage? I said no to that. One of the few times I said no. But I did end up giving them $40,000 toward the down payment because Dee cried on the phone for 40 minutes and said she just wanted stability for Sophie. By the time I understood what I'd built, I was giving them $4,500 a month. Every month, on top of the down payment, on top of the car, on top of the 1,000 other smaller things. $4,400 monthly. For a couple with a house, 2 working adults, well, 1 working adult and no real emergency. That was over $50,000 a year. I told myself I was helping my family. I told myself Carol Ann would have wanted this. I told myself a lot of things. I found out about the cancer in February. Colon cancer, stage 2. The oncologist, my real one, Dr. Hung at Ohio State, was clear. Caught early enough, good prognosis. But we needed to move quickly. Surgery first, then a round of chemotherapy as a precaution. I called Dee first because she was local. Lawrence was in Portland and I didn't want to worry him over the phone before I knew more. I sat at my kitchen table and I told my daughter that I had cancer and that I was scared and that I wanted to see her. She came over 2 days later. Not the next day. 2 days later. She brought Troy. They sat across from me at that same kitchen table, and the first thing Troy said, not the second thing, the first, was, "Dad, have you thought about what this means for your estate planning?" I looked at him. I looked at Dee. She was looking at her phone. I said, "I'm 67 years old and I just found out I have cancer, Troy. I haven't thought about much beyond that." He nodded like I'd said something reasonable and then kept talking. Something about how uncertainty around my health meant it might be wise to get documents in order. Was I working with an attorney? Had I reviewed the beneficiary designations on my accounts recently? Dee added without looking up, "We're just trying to help, Dad. I had surgery in March. It went well. I came home after 3 days with instructions to rest, not lift anything over 10 pounds for 6 weeks, and to have someone check on me daily for the first 2 weeks at least. I called Dee from the hospital before discharge. I told her when I'd be home and what the recovery looked like. She said, "Oh, Dad, we have Sophie's spring showcase that week, and Troy has a work conference. Could you maybe arrange for a home aide for a bit? We can check in when things settle." I was quiet for a moment, long enough that the nurse in the room glanced up from her clipboard. "Sophie's showcase," I said. "She's been practicing her violin for months, Dad. We can't just." "Of course not," I said. "Go to the showcase." I hung up. I stared at the ceiling for a while. Then I called Lawrence. Lawrence was on a plane from Portland 36 hours later. He stayed for 11 days, worked remotely from my guest room, made me eggs every morning, drove me to my follow-up appointment, and sat with me through my first 2 chemo infusions without being asked. His wife sent a handwritten card. His boys made me a get-well drawing that I still have on my refrigerator. Not once did Lawrence ask about my estate. I started thinking clearly somewhere around my 3rd chemo session. There's something about sitting in an infusion chair for 6 hours, watching chemicals drip into your arm, that strips away the noise. You think about what matters. You think about what you've been pretending not to notice. I'd been pretending not to notice a lot. I called my attorney, Vic Hargrove, in April. Vic and I had worked together for 15 years. He did my estate planning after Carol Ann died, updated it when I retired. He's sharp, methodical, and he doesn't sugarcoat things. I told him everything. The monthly payments, the down payment gift, the way Diane Troy had responded to my diagnosis. The power of attorney document they'd mailed me to sign in early April, which I had not signed, and which appeared, according to Vic, to have been submitted to a financial institution bearing my signature anyway. Vic was very quiet for a moment. "Bernard," he said, "I want you to listen carefully. Do not transfer any money, do not sign any documents, and do not discuss your finances with your daughter or her husband until you hear from me." I said, "Okay. And I need you to change your online banking passwords today, right now, before we hang up." I did. What Vic discovered over the next 3 weeks was methodical and cold. Diane Troy had done their homework in a way. They'd found a notary willing to authenticate the power of attorney document. They'd tried to open a secondary account at my bank linked to my primary checking. The bank's fraud department had flagged it. The branch manager had called the number on file for me, which was a cell number I'd had before I upgraded my phone 2 years ago. They'd left voicemails I'd never received. They'd also approached a private physician, the one Judge Harmon mentioned, to produce documentation suggesting my cancer diagnosis had compromised my cognitive function. This was, to put it plainly, a lie. Dr. Mertha Wong would later describe my cognitive function at that time as entirely normal, articulate, and appropriate. Vic filed a complaint. The bank froze the fraudulent account attempt. We gathered everything. I stopped the monthly payments in May. The first call came within 4 hours. Di's voice on the voicemail was controlled, but only barely. "Dad, there seems to be a transfer issue. Can you call us?" Then an hour later, "Dad, this is urgent. The mortgage payment is due." Then, "Troy, Bernard, we need to talk. This isn't the time for. We have Sophie to think about. There are real financial pressures here, and I think we need to sit down like adults. I saved every voicemail to a secure folder. By the end of the first week, I had 41 missed calls from Di, 17 from Troy, and one from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be their first attorney, who was already circling. The hearing was on a Tuesday in September, 8 months after my diagnosis. My daughter and her husband had filed a petition to declare me mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs, citing my cancer, my age, and the fraudulent physician's report. It was as Vic described it to me the night before, in the parking garage of the courthouse. One of the most transparent attempts at elder financial abuse I've seen in 30 years of practice. I wore my gray suit. Carol Ann had picked it out for a retirement dinner 8 years ago. It still fit. The courtroom was small. Judge Harmon was in her mid-50s, silver-haired, with reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. She'd reviewed the documents before we came in. I could tell from the way she looked at Di's attorney when he stood to speak. That particular stillness that means someone has already decided you're wasting their time. Di and Troy sat at the table across from me. Di was in a cream blazer, composed. Troy had a new haircut. They looked like people who believed presentation could substitute for character. Vic laid it all out. The fraudulent power of attorney, the bank account attempt, the paid physician, my actual medical records from Dr. Howen, a letter from my oncologist confirming that I had, at every appointment, demonstrated full cognitive clarity and had participated actively and intelligently in my own treatment decisions. Judge Harmon let Di's attorney present his case. Then she asked Di directly whether the submitted power of attorney bore my authentic signature. Di said she believed I'd signed it during a period of confusion. Judge Harmon looked at her for a long moment. Your father's own physician has testified in writing that no such confusion existed. Your paid physician's license is currently under review for multiple instances of fraudulent medical documentation, and the notary who authenticated this document has given a deposition to the fraud unit. She set the paper down. Mrs. Vickers, I'm going to ask you one more time. Did your father sign this document? Di said nothing. Troy stood up. Your Honor, we were trying to protect him. He's been making financially irresponsible, Mr. Vickers. Sit down. He sat. Judge Harmon looked at me, and for the first time something softened slightly in her expression. Mr. Vickers looked at me, and for the first time something softened slightly in her expression. Calloway, would you like to address the court? I stood. I'd written some notes on a card, but I didn't end up using them. Your Honor, I said, over the past 6 years, I gave my daughter and son-in-law approximately $312,000. Monthly payments, a down payment on a home, vehicles, medical bills, when I was diagnosed with cancer and came home from surgery unable to lift a grocery bag. My daughter told me she couldn't come because her daughter had a violin recital. I paused. My son flew from Portland and stayed 11 days. He didn't ask me for $1, he made me eggs. I stopped there. I didn't trust my Royce to do more. The room was quiet. Judge Harmon looked at Di and Troy. She looked at their attorney. Then she said, This petition is denied. Mr. Calloway is manifestly competent. Furthermore, I am referring the fraudulent power of attorney submission to the county prosecutor's office for review. She looked at their attorney directly. Counselor, I strongly advise your clients to cooperate with that process. We're done. The gavel came down. Vic shook my hand. His grip was tight. He was smiling in that restrained way of attorneys who'd been doing this long enough to not show too much. Across the room, Di had gone white. Troy was talking at their attorney in a low, fast voice. Their attorney was gathering his papers with the focused efficiency of a man who wanted to be somewhere else. In the parking lot, Vic walked me to my car. The referral to the prosecutor's office is serious, he said. They may face criminal charges. Depends on what the DA's office decides to pursue. What should I expect? Honestly, they'll likely make a deal if charges are filed. First offense, no actual financial transfer completed. Probably avoid jail time. But it'll be on record. He paused, How are you feeling? I thought about it, like I can breathe again. I drove home alone. My phone started buzzing before I reached the highway. Di, Dad, please call me. Please. Troy, Bernard. This is a misunderstanding. We need to talk. Di again, Dad. I know you're angry. Please. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had 23 missed calls. Di's voicemails went from controlled to fractured over the course of about 40 minutes. By the last one, her voice was something I didn't recognize. You're going to regret this. We have a daughter. Sophie has a grandfather. You're throwing that away. You're throwing all of it away. I listened to all of them. Then I saved them and went inside and made a cup of tea and sat in Carol Ann's reading chair and looked at the garden through the back window. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Dee and Troy, through their new attorney. They'd already cycled through the first one. Communicated only in writing, which suited me fine. Vic handled everything. They were not charged criminally, as it turned out. The DA's office concluded there was insufficient evidence of completed fraud, given that no money had actually transferred. But the fraudulent power of attorney submission resulted in a formal civil finding and a requirement to pay my legal costs, $9,400. They didn't have $9,400. Not easily. I learned this through Sophie. My granddaughter was 11. She had her mother's dark eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness, which I considered a good sign. She called me from her tablet one Saturday morning, her voice small and careful like she was walking on ice. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better every week. How are you?" "Mom cries at night. She thinks I don't hear her, but I do." A pause. "Are you and Mom going to be okay?" I thought about what to say. Sophie was 11, not 5. She deserved some version of the truth. "Your mom and I are working through something hard. It's between adults, and it's not your fault, and it's not about you." "She says you don't love us anymore." That landed somewhere specific and painful. "I love you," I said. "That doesn't change. But sometimes people in a family hurt each other, and the people who got hurt need some time." "Did Mum hurt you?" "Yes." She was quiet. Then, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. You have nothing to be sorry for. You just keep being 11. Is that a deal?" "Okay." She sniffled. "Okay." She sniffled. "Can I come see your garden sometime? Anytime you want. You call me and I'll pick you up." I hung up and sat with it for a while. The garden was my anchor, Carol Ann's roses along the fence, the tomatoes I put in every May, the herb bed she'd started that I'd kept going all these years because it would have bothered her if I'd let it go. Sophie had always loved coming over to help water things. Her mother had never understood the appeal. I made a call to Vic the following week. I told him I wanted to set up an educational trust for Sophie. Directly in her name, controlled by a trustee other than her parents, accessible for school expenses when she turned 18. Vic said he'd handle it. Then I called Lawrence. Lawrence listened to everything, the hearing, the calls, the prosecutor's decision, Sophie. He didn't say much until I finished. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry you went through that. I'm sorry you had to watch your sister do it. I'm sorry you had to watch your sister do it. Are you okay?" "Really?" "I think I am," I said. "I think I've been not okay for a long time without knowing it. And now I'm tired of pretending." "What do you need?" "Nothing." "I have what I need. But thank you for asking." That was the difference. That was always the difference. In November, 9 months after the diagnosis, 2 months after the hearing, Di called me herself. Not Troy. Just her. I almost didn't answer. I sat there watching the phone light up 3 times before I picked up. "Dad?" Her voice sounded different, rung out in a way I hadn't heard from her since Carol Ann died. "Troy and I are separating." She said it flat, like she was reading it off a card. "He's moved out, where the lawyer says we'll probably sell the house." I said nothing. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything." "I know that." She paused. I'm not asking. I needed you to know. I appreciate you telling me. Silence. Dad, was it always this bad? Did I always? She stopped. Started again. Mom used to tell me things about how I could be. I didn't listen. I thought she was being dramatic. Another pause. She wasn't being dramatic, was she? It wasn't a question. No, I said, she wasn't. I'm sorry, Dad. Her voice cracked on the last word. Not for the legal thing. I mean, yes, for that. But for all of it. For not coming when you had surgery. For the money. For Troy and I spent your money on things that I can't even remember now. Trips. Furniture. Stuff. And I let myself think you owed it to us. I let myself believe that. I was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she said, Dad, are you still there? I'm here. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't, Dee, I said. I hear you. I need some time. But I hear you. She cried then, quietly. The kind of crying that's mostly exhaled breath. We didn't say much after that, but before she hung up, she said, Can I bring Sophie to see you sometime? She misses you. Sophie can see me whenever she wants, I said. You know where I live. The house sold in January. Troy moved into an apartment in Dublin. Di rented a smaller place in Cuntonville. A 2-bedroom, modest, the kind of place that required you to actually live within your means. She'd gone back to work at an accounting firm, a job she'd left 8 years ago when she married Troy. I heard most of this from Sophie, who called me every Saturday now without fail. She was starting middle school in the fall. She'd quit violin. She'd never really liked it, she told me. She'd just done it because it was what they'd wanted. And she'd picked up drawing instead. She showed me her sketchbook over video call one afternoon, paging through it with the phone tilted. Mostly landscapes, some animals. She had a good eye. These are really something, I said. Mum says it won't lead anywhere. Your mum said a lot of things. Draw what you love. She laughed. It sounded like Carol Ann. My chemo ended in December. Dr. Huang called my response excellent. The follow-up scans in March were clean. I was not out of the woods permanently. You never really are with cancer. But I was in as good a position as I could hope for, and I felt it. I felt it in the way I moved through the day and without the weight of the previous year pressing on everything. I'd also stopped the monthly payments, obviously. That was done. 11 months without writing that check clarified certain things for me about who I was and who I'd allowed people to make me. I had let my guilt over Carol Ann's death, over not being there, over not somehow knowing, turn into a checkbook I handed to my daughter to manage. That was my part in it. I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I told Vic I was thinking about revising the will. He said, any time I was ready. I told him to give it another year. I wanted to see, not assume. It was a Saturday in early April when Di brought Sophie over. She texted first, the way you'd text someone you weren't sure of. Is it okay if we stop by? Sophie really wants to see the garden. No pressure. D. I texted back, come over. I'll put coffee on. They pulled up in a small Honda, sensible, used, nothing like the SUV Troy used to drive. Dee looked thinner than I remembered. She'd cut her hair shorter. She walked up the front path the way you approach something uncertain, and when I opened the door she stopped and looked at me for a moment with an expression I didn't have a name for. Hi, Dad. Come in, I said. Sophie pushed past her and hugged me hard around the middle, the way kids do when they haven't seen someone in too long. I held on. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Troy had asked about my estate minutes after hearing I had cancer. I thought about that briefly and then let it go. Dee wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Sophie had gone out to the garden with her sketchbook. She's been asking about you every week, Dee said. We talk on Saturdays, I know. She tells me. A small, complicated smile. She tells me. A small, complicated smile. She tells me more than you'd think. I looked at my daughter. She looked tired in a different way than before. Not the exhausted performance of someone managing an expensive life they'd built on borrowed money. just genuinely tired the way people are when they've been through something real. "Are you managing?" I asked. "Barely." She didn't say it dramatically, just honestly. "The accounting job is fine. It's not glamorous. My salary covers the rent and groceries and Sophie's school supplies and not a lot else. Troy's behind on his support payments." "I'm sorry to hear that." She looked up. "Are you?" "I'm sorry Sophie's father isn't reliable." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "I spent 8 years convincing myself that money was the same as being taken care of, that the fact that you kept giving it meant everything was fine." She looked out toward the garden window. Sophie was crouched near the herb bed, sketching. "I think I knew it wasn't fine. I just found it easier not to look at that." "Your mother tried to tell you," I said. "A few times, I know." A long pause. "I miss her." "So do I." We sat with that for a while. The kitchen was quiet. Through the window, Sophie looked up from her sketchbook and waved at us, then went back to drawing. "I'm not changing the will yet," I said. "I want to be clear about that. This isn't a reset. This is a start, if you want it to be." Dee nodded. She didn't flinch, which was something. "What I want," I continued, "is to see you and Sophie on a regular basis. Not because you need something from me. Because you're my daughter, and she's my granddaughter. If you can come without asking for money, without angling for anything, just come, then we can work from there." "I can do that," she said quietly. "I want to do that." I looked at her. I didn't know whether I believed her yet. "That was okay. Belief was something you built, not something you gave away." "Then we start today," I said. "Go out and see the garden with your daughter. I'll bring coffee." They stayed for 3 hours. Sophie dragged Di around every corner of the yard, explaining her sketches. Di knelt in the dirt next to the herb bed in her good jeans without complaining. And when Sophie showed her a drawing of the roses she'd done, Di looked at it for a long moment and said, "That's really good, honey." And she meant it. I could tell she meant it. I stood at the back door and watched them for a while and thought about Carol Ann, who would have been out there in 5 seconds flat, who would have had Sophie helping her prune the roses by now, who would have made Di laugh about something, who always knew how to close the distance between people without making it feel like work. I missed her every day. But I've learned, finally, that grief wasn't a reason to let people use you. If anything, she'd have been appalled that I'd let it go as far as it had. That thought, more than anything, had gotten me through the past year. When they left, Sophie hugged me goodbye at the door and said, "Can I come back next Saturday?" "You come back whenever you want," I said. "Bring your sketchbook." Dee stood at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked up at me and then looked away, at the yard, at the street, at something I couldn't see. "Thank you," she said, "for this." "Thanks, Sophie," I said. "She's the one who called every Saturday." Di smiled, really smiled, the first real one I'd seen in a long time. "She gets that from you." I went back inside and sat down and let myself feel whatever that was. Not forgiveness, not yet, not quite. But the door wasn't closed. Maybe that was enough for now. I'd spent decades building things, a career, a home, a garden, a retirement. I'd rebuilt myself once after Carol Ann died, and I'd thought that was the hardest thing I'd ever do. But this past year had been its own kind of rebuilding, from the inside out. Stopping the payments, changing the accounts, sitting in the infusion chair, and finally being honest with myself about what I'd been doing and why. Standing up in that courtroom and saying, in plain English, what had happened to me. "I'm 68 years old. I have clean scans and a good attorney and a granddaughter who draws roses and calls me every Saturday. I am done being someone's safety net with no flaw. Whatever comes next, with Di, with the will, with all of it, I go into it with my eyes open. That's what I should have done 20 years ago. That's what I'm doing now. And if someone in my life chooses the vacation over the hospital room again, they'll find out quickly and finally that there are no more second chances on that front. I learned that lesson the hard way. I don't intend to need to learn it again. I've had a lot of time to think about how I got here. Not the cancer. I mean the years before it. The slow, quiet way I let things become what they became. There's a version of this story where I'm the victim, and that's the whole of it. Di and Troy were greedy. They tried to steal from me. End of story. That version is easier. It's also incomplete. The truth is, I made choices. Every month I wrote that check, I made a choice. Every time Dia called with a problem and I reached for my wallet instead of asking a harder question, I made a choice. I told myself it was love, and part of it was, but part of it was also avoidance, of the discomfort of saying no, of the guilt I'd carried since Carol Ann died, of the fear that if I stopped giving, my daughter would stop showing up. Turns out she was barely showing up anyway. I just hadn't let myself see it clearly. What I've come to understand, after everything, is that how you treat people in their worst moments is the truest thing about you. Not what you say at the dinner table, not what you post, not how you present yourself when things are comfortable, what you do when someone needs you, and it costs you something. That's the real measure. Troy asked about my estate within minutes of learning I had cancer. Di couldn't come when I came home from surgery. Those weren't accidents or bad timing. Those were answers. They told me exactly what I needed to know, and I chose to believe them. I also chose, eventually, to do something about it. That's the part I want to sit with, because I think it matters more than the betrayal itself. A lot of people get hurt by the people they love. What's harder and rarer is deciding that being hurt doesn't mean being helpless. I was 67 years old, recovering from surgery, going through chemotherapy, and I still had the capacity to change my accounts, call my attorney, stand up in a courtroom, and say plainly what had happened to me. That wasn't courage in some grand sense. It was just refusing to keep pretending. The consequences for Di and Troy came not because I engineered them, but because actions have weight. Troy's manipulation unraveled the moment real scrutiny was applied. Di's choices in her marriage, her finances, her life, those were always going to catch up with her. All I did was stop absorbing the impact on their behalf. Sophie draws roses now. She calls me every Saturday. She has her grandmother's laugh and more sense than either of her parents gave her credit for. She didn't do anything to deserve what her parents put her through. And she didn't do anything to deserve losing access to her grandfather. And I wasn't going to let that happen. The trust I set up for her education is the best money I've spent in years. Money given with eyes open, with conditions, towards something real. Dee is trying. I don't know yet what that amounts to. But I'm watching, not assuming, which is the thing I should have done from the beginning. I'm 68 years old. My scans are clean. My garden is in good shape. And I finally understand the difference between generosity and appeasement. One comes from strength. The other comes from fear. I spent too long confusing them. I don't intend to make that mistake again.